All right, let's jump right into this explainer and confront the terrifying, absolute brilliance of Fyodor Dostoevsky's masterpiece, The Brothers Karamazov. We're definitely not doing a simple plot summary today. Instead, we're stepping onto a massive philosophical battleground. We're talking about a 19th century world completely reeling from rapid modernization, where Dostoevsky forces us to look at the darkest corners of human nature, the agonizing weight of free will, and honestly, the very existence of God. We have to start with the novel's highest stakes challenge, which pops up in that famous chapter, Rebellion. Ivan Karamazov drops this completely devastating moral hypothetical on his devout brother, Alyosha. He basically says, imagine you're building the ultimate destiny of humanity, but to guarantee it, you have to torture just one innocent child to death. Would you do it? It's a brutal question that completely slices through any justification for a divinely ordered world. And this hits the nail on the head regarding the central dilemma Dostoevsky wants us wrestling with right from the start. Think about it. Can any morally sensitive person, anyone who truly loves humanity, accept a universe where universal peace is bought with the unavenged tears of a child? For Ivan, the answer is a hard, definitive no. He famously decides to return his ticket to God. Scholars actually define Ivan's specific intellectual mindset here as a form of moral empiricism. It's this deep fixation on observable, little facts and strict cause and effect. Ivan is completely paralyzed by his reliance on the scientific method. He literally cannot accept God's world. To him, if cause invariably follows effect, then individual suffering is just a cold, mechanical outcome, which leaves the innocent with absolutely no justice. So the crucial conflict here is between Ivan's rational earthly geometry, what he calls his Euclidean mind, which fundamentally rejects injustice, and the massive spiritual leap required to understand God's non-Euclidean universe. Dostoevsky was actually super fascinated by the new mathematical geometries of his era. He's suggesting that to find real faith, you have to step entirely outside the rigid boundaries of material observation. You have to embrace a reality where, just maybe, parallel lines might actually intersect in eternity. But if you reject that spiritual leap, well, the consequences are incredibly dark. Dostoevsky saw clearly that as 19th century rationalism started dissolving traditional religious foundations, humanity was basically left staring into a terrifying nihilistic void. Ivan's ultimate conclusion is chillingly simple. If God is dead, all is permitted. Without some kind of transcendent moral framework, human ethics just completely collapse. This building sense of nihilistic dread peaks in the Grand Inquisitor chapter, which, by the way, is widely considered one of the greatest philosophical passages in all of world literature. Ivan imagines Christ returning to Earth during the Spanish Inquisition, only to be promptly arrested. And his captor, a religious dictator, offers this chilling triad to control humanity: miracle, mystery, and authority. The Inquisitor's argument is terrifyingly, almost perfectly persuasive. He essentially tells Christ that his gift of radical freedom is just too agonizing for weak human beings to bear. He argues that people actually prefer material security, literally bread, over liberty. In his view, the most compassionate thing you can do is actually enslave humanity, completely removing the heavy burden of free choice to create a peaceful, perfectly structured human anthill. Yet, how does Dostoevsky answer this hyper-rational, incredibly oppressive argument? Not with logic. He answers it with a silent action. Christ listens quietly to this entire tirade and then simply kisses the old man on his bloodless lips. As theologian Rowan Williams points out, this mute kiss is an act of radical, transcendent compassion. It entirely escapes the earthly world of cause and effect, completely refusing the Inquisitor's terms. It's a real game changer. Now, to truly grasp the monumental stakes of this story, we have to look closely at the psychological layers of the author himself. Biographer Joseph Frank extensively documents how, in 1839, Dostoevsky's own father was violently murdered by his serfs. This deeply traumatic real-world event planted the seeds for his lifelong obsession with parricide, guilt, and the agonizing psychological torment of secretly wishing for someone's death. Because he grappled so deeply with these personal demons, Dostoevsky doesn't write like your standard novelist. Modern scholars, drawing heavily on Mikhail Bakhtin's theories, note that Dostoevsky creates a polyphonic novel, meaning he doesn't just preach a single message from on high. He stands right alongside his creations. He gives his atheistic characters, like Ivan, and his faithful characters equally brilliant, fiercely independent, and totally compelling voices. This intense character depth opens the door for some truly fascinating psychoanalytical readings. Looking through a Freudian lens, the brothers aren't just characters. They represent deeply fractured psychological defenses. You've got Dmitri acting as the turbulent id, Ivan, whose massive intellect completely fails to shield him from suffering, Alyosha, terrified of his own dark instincts, and the illegitimate Smerdyakov, the neurotic vessel who actually commits the parricide. They are all struggling, and mostly failing, to escape that dark Karamazov taint. But Dostoevsky doesn't just keep things internal. He brilliantly shifts this psychological torment outward into society. He uses the novel's climactic murder trial to directly attack real-world events. He was actively reacting against the introduction of Western-style adversarial law and jury trials in Russia during the 1870s, drawing a ton of direct inspiration from the highly controversial Cronenberg and Kayronova abuse cases. See, those 1864 legal reforms introduced defense lawyers, whom Dostoevsky fiercely and famously branded as adulterers of thought. He watched in absolute horror as these highly manipulative lawyers used pure rhetoric to justify horrific crimes of passion, sparking this national mania for acquittals. He deeply, deeply feared that the courtroom was actively replacing the church, becoming a terrible, corrupted school of ethics for the Russian public. This directly connects to the fashionable socialist ideology of the time, known then as the doctrine of the environment. Rising right alongside materialism, this doctrine basically argued that criminals were simply unfortunate victims of a corrupt society. Because the social structure itself was flawed, the individual was completely absolved of personal guilt. I mean, if the environment is sick, how can you possibly blame the individual, right? So here we find this intense, totally irreconcilable ideological clash. On one side, you have the socialist view that reduces humans to blameless victims of their environment, effectively stripping them of their free will and human dignity. And on the exact opposite side, you have the Orthodox Christian view, represented heavily by Elder Zosima, which demands strict individual moral accountability, acknowledging our profound human freedom through absolute uncompromising responsibility. In the novel itself, Dostoevsky absolutely roasts the attempts of the defense attorney Fyodor and the opportunist Rakitin to blame the environment for the Karamazov family tragedy. By trying to decriminalize a brutal crime of passion using sociology, they insult the very concept of human agency. And this sets the stage perfectly for Dostoevsky's ultimate philosophical synthesis. To combat Ivan's deep despair, the Inquisitor's tyranny, and the lawyer's deflections, Dostoevsky brings in Elder Zosima, a character heavily inspired by the monks at the real-life Optinapustin monastery. Zosima provides the ultimate counter-argument. We simply cannot wait for utopian social reorganization to fix everything. Our salvation and the healing of the world has to come through active, selfless, and honestly excruciatingly difficult love. This reveals Dostoevsky's radical, honestly terrifying solution to the problem of human suffering. Rather than shifting the blame to society or trading away our freedom for a lack of bread, Zosima insists that true freedom requires accepting absolute, agonizing responsibility. We have to recognize our deep spiritual interconnectedness and willingly bear the burden of the sins of the entire world. So, throughout this explainer, Dostoevsky has deliberately forced us into a very uncomfortable corner. On one hand, you have the comfortable, enslaved security of the Grand Inquisitor's anthill. On the other hand, you have Dostoevsky's actual vision, a chaotic, suffering world where humanity retains its divine dignity only by bearing the incredibly heavy, glorious responsibility of a truly free soul. As we wrap up this deep dive into the Brothers Karamazov, I want to leave you with one massive question to ponder. Are we truly strong enough to bear the crushing weight of Dostoevsky's absolute moral freedom? Or, if pushed to the absolute brink, would we eventually trade it all away for the comfort of bread? Think about it.